All right, welcome to another Couch GM podcast. Today we are live with the Locked On Mariners crew in Ty and Colby. So first off, thank you to you both for taking the time to talk tonight.
Yeah, appreciate you having us on, man.
Yep,
Absolutely.
excited to talk some ball.
Yeah, so first off, kind of like I do on my podcast at the beginning, I'd like to get to know you guys, your story, how you got into creating content for Locked On Mariners and just how that came to be. So if you guys want to start off, talk about your background, how you got into it.
Yeah, so Colby was already at Soto Mojo, which is the fan-sided website for the Mariners. I applied to write there. He kind of hired me, right? Like you had a say in
I
it,
was
right?
desperate.
Yeah, you were desperate.
I was desperate for writers and content creators, and Ty was one of the only people to apply. So it was,
Right.
I guess.
End of the list, yeah.
Yeah. So started doing that. I was just like a contributor. He was the site expert. And then I ended up being like the co-site expert, and we started doing a podcast together. And once our time at Fansided kind of ran out, there's a whole story that goes along with that.
I got us fired, is what he's trying to say.
Yeah, we'll maybe we'll get into that later. But yeah, so we decided, you know what, let's keep talking ball together, because I was telling you before we went live, like Colby and I really bonded over the Mariners rebuild. It was right at the start of the rebuild, and he liked what they were doing with the rebuild. I liked what they were doing with the rebuild. We just kind of like vibed on that level, and that pretty much led into us just podcasting together almost every single day. And so now we're here.
Yeah, so you guys were friends before. Ty, you're in Toronto, is that correct?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Washington for 12 years, moved to New Mexico with my family, and then met who eventually became my wife on the internet. And she lives here in Toronto, and I decided to move here, become a permanent resident.
There you go. How about you, Colby?
Yeah, so different story to how Ty presented it.
Sure.
Born and raised in Washington, lived here my entire life. Don't ever want to leave. Love the Pacific Northwest. But yeah, so basically, like Ty said, I was a news site expert at Soto Mojo. Desperate for writers, and we couldn't pay anybody. And Ty was a schmuck who was willing to write for free, so hired him. And then he kind of forced his way into be my co-site expert by stealing half of my money and just saying, I'm going to be your site expert now. And so, that's how that started. We started doing a podcast for fun, like the Soto Mojo podcast, and that would just be whenever. It was terrible. I mean, we went back.
Oh, it's so bad.
No
one go look back at those.
Yeah. You can find them; they're still out there. But like,
don't do that. Don't do that.
They were really bad. But yeah, we were writing at Soto, and then some things transpired. I'll let Ty decide whether or not he wants to tell everybody why we got fired. But yeah, so we were just, hey, what are we going to do? What's the next step? And so we started Control the Zone, the podcast, our Patreon podcast. And then we had a website for a brief minute, and then Ty completely stopped writing on that because he got hired at the time. Was it Seahawk Maven, Ty?
It was Seahawk Maven at the time.
Seahawk Maven. Yeah. A job that I got him. Again, another job that I got Ty.
Yeah.
So he wrote there for a year. The website kind of died, but we kept doing the podcast, and we very small Patreon podcast. It wasn't really doing much, but it was fun to record. And then must have been June of 2021. We've been doing it for about a year. Somebody reached out to Ty. Was it Jeff or? I mean, I would know who it was.
It was Sean Woodley, who's the host of Locked On Raptors. He was the head of Locked On's MLB division at the time. That's now Jeff Carr, who does Locked On Reds. But yeah, he reached out, and we kind of owe it to Jason Churchill, because he reached out to Churchill initially, and Churchill recommended us. And so Sean reached out, and I was like, hey, I've been doing this podcast with Colby. I would love to have a co-host if that's possible. And he was like, yeah, great. So we were just kind of off and running from that point forward. Started, we took it over. It was initially hosted by DC Lundberg. He stopped doing it, I think around June or July, and then we picked it up in August, in early August 2021, and been doing it every single day pretty much ever since.
Yeah, right on. Can definitely appreciate the dedication and the amount of times that you guys have to jump on the podcast. I'm curious with your process, like the weekly schedule, what that looks like for you guys.
Yeah, so we record every day to try and keep it as current as possible. So we avoid recording ahead of time, like days ahead of time, as much as possible, unless like this past March, Colby and I both had like big trips we were going on, so we had to record ahead of time. There was just no way
Mhm.
around that. But for the most part, we try to record the day of posting. So usually we'll start recording around 3 my time, Colby noon Colby's time. I'm usually late. Surprise, surprise. Um, but yeah, we'll record around then, and I'll get to editing and get that thing up as soon as I can. There really isn't like a huge plan around it. It's just like whenever it's ready, it's going out.
Yeah. Cool. And then with the Locked On series, I know that there's like Locked On NFL and basketball, I believe, and
Yeah.
MLB. What's that look like as far as, do they just kind of, hey, here's the brand. It's up to you guys to go ahead and run with it and do what you want with it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, they have some direction in terms of things that like we need to say or mention on the show. Like, we have a lot of like, obviously we have the ad reads. That's how we get
Right.
paid first and foremost. And
Yeah.
we don't get to decide the ads. Like those are already
Yeah.
predetermined. They're network wide ads. But we have to read the ads. There's, certain slogans and things that we need to remind people of. And that's really all they ask of us though. And the rest is just up to us. As long as we just stay on task, we're talking about the team. That's about it.
Yeah. Did you guys hear that? We have nothing to do with the ads.
We
Okay.
have nothing to do with
We
the
don't write
ads.
them. We don't pick them.
I just
We
read the
read
words that
them.
are on the paper.
Do.
Oh, yeah.
Take your complaint somewhere else.
And that's kind of some foresight into where media I feel like is heading, as we're seeing with the Root Sports deal. What's going on? Things are moving towards streaming, and
Yep.
the podcasting has been huge. So this is really kind of where things are heading.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I mean, you can see it right now in the Mariners sphere in general. I mean, like with you, right? With like guys like Jay's Trident
There's
Podcast
been a ton of
and
creators that have been popping
Mariner
up.
Mojo. Yeah, like the thing that I tell people a lot, like, because a lot of people have asked Colby and I, like, how did you get into this? How have you grown your podcast? And really, like, what I say is like, I don't think it's really much of what we're doing. We were just early. Like, there weren't a lot of people at the time that we started doing this more seriously that were talking about the Mariners in this kind of
Right.
capacity. But now, as we've seen again, like Mariner Mojo, Jay's Trident Podcast, and all these people are now making podcasts and making content surrounding the Mariners. And it's great, man. I love seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, the more it's all about building community, really. And the more, people will find their channels or their people that they can that they agree with, or that they lock onto basically, and watch all of their content. I'm curious how you guys kind of process your info and collaborate before a podcast. Do you just jump on, have a quick conversation, and then hit live, or how does that work? Because when big deals happen, do you take a moment to let yourself get emotional before you have to analyze the trade and realize what's going on?
Colby, I think you want to take this one. See
No,
it on your face.
yeah. So like the big episodes, like the ones that do really well for us and the ones that people are interested in, are obviously the ones right after a major deal is announced. I think,
Or a big game.
like, or a big game, right? The playoff series, certainly.
Yeah.
I think like for us, it's pretty funny. We can trace like when we really started to take off as a channel, as a podcast, pretty clearly to the Mariners' 14-game win streak that they had before the All-Star break, and then obviously shortly after they acquired Luis Castillo, and that's when we really the Luis Castillo podcast. Pretty after the fact. I think we got the news the Mariners were playing in a clunker of a game against the Astros. They were down like 10-0 or something crazy like that. And so yeah, Ty and I was like, hey, we need to record. Ty needed like 20 minutes to get set up and all that stuff. So in the meantime, I'm I'm just trying to get as much info as I can before the show starts, and then typically we just let it rip. I'm not. I'm not. There's analytical Colby and there's emotional Colby, and typically that day after or the day of the show, it's more emotional. It's more, that's when I go on my rants that people seem to like. Particularly Luis Castillo episode was a big one for me. So yeah, typically it's I want to go now and I want to get, let's just get this out there. Let's get first emotion, like let's get that out there and see how we react to this. And then usually the day after is when it's a little more, like, hey, what's the pros? What's the cons? Here's how this fits. Here's what they could do next. But the day of, like, to me, news is like sports news is something to get excited about, or it's something to have an immediate reaction to. And so for me, I want to get that reaction out there as soon as we can, as soon as it's feasible, because I think that's the raw emotion that you get, like the adrenaline you go through after a big game or a big signing or a big trade or something. That's a lot of fun for me. And it's, those are the episodes I like to record the most. So if I have to, text Ty at 4:30 on Christmas Eve and tell him to, get his setup ready to go, cause we're podcasting about Mitch Garver, then that's what we're going to do, because I enjoy those shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of let yourself be a fan for a little bit, and then the next day it's more so the analyst coming out on the next podcast.
Yeah, it's definitely like those are definitely like the unhinged shows, right? And then it's like the next day we'll come back and we'll really dive into stuff now that we've like processed it, done some more research, etc. I do like to try and process some things, as much as I can before getting on even the initial show. But for the most part, I want to try and let it rip and just kind of react. And I think that's more fun too.
Yeah. Have you done any live podcasts?
No, and it's specifically with the locked on stuff, because we have to do ads and all this stuff. I want to try and have that as uniform as possible. So the live stuff that could get a little funky, and especially like if one of us have an internet connection issue or something like that, like I don't want to have to try and like account for that. I'd rather just if like I need to edit something out or what have you, because there's just like little quirks. Sometimes my mic will just randomly disconnect for no reason. Like a lot of our listeners know that Locked On Mariners is synonymous with technical issues. So like there's just too much sketchiness to do live shows, at least in that regard. But we have done live streams on our other channel, which is basically dead at this point. But we do the occasional live stream on there where we just kind of let loose and we're just ourselves on there and just kind of talk with the chat, answer some questions and all that stuff. So we do try and dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess getting into this offseason with the Mariners, kind of talking through the initial emotions, I'm curious what you guys, initially thought with the Geno trade, with the Kelnick trade, with what's been going on this entire offseason. And then once you've had some time to process that, what are your thoughts on where things currently stand? I know after the Mitch Garver signing, things are a bit better. And then, this Robbie Ray trade. So walk me through this offseason for you guys.
Colby, want to go first?
Sure. So kind of the offseason of two halves here. Of course, it all kind of kicks off with Jerry's infamous postseason presser where he drops the 54% quote. And, even though I think most of us understood what he was trying to say in the moment, it didn't play at all. And we're doing you a favor and all that's like, it was a blunder. There's no doubt about that. Jerry will admit that himself, but obviously it starts there. And then, you're kind of expecting, okay, like this is the year that we were told this is going to be the ramp up. We've established our core. And now we can add to it. We have all this payroll space. And then, John Stanton's dug out from under Jerry DePoto. I think literally the eve of free agency. Like, I think that is right when they start to really pull back, that because you listen to the talk before that, it's, yep, payroll's going up. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then right around the GM meetings, we start to hear like, well, it'll be higher than last year. And that's not what we want to hear. We want to hear it's going up significantly. So yeah, when you see the deals come in, the Geno trade, when you see the Kelnick trade is kind of the big one that just kind of signals what the front office is being forced to do. You hate it as a fan because you grow attached to these guys, and they're good players, and they didn't get better with those trades. I mean, that's not really debatable. At least at the time, they didn't get better with those trades, and that's kind of the whole point. And you're taking on less than you should for guys just to clear their contract, and it sucks. And so I think, for me, the early stages are about trying to separate the front office from ownership, which I know is hard for some people. They see them as management just in general, and it stinks. But I think when you look at the moves that have been made recently, and you've kind of seen the creative nature of Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander, certainly you look at, in the past, you look at the draft classes they brought in, the international free agency, you look at most of the moves they work out pretty well. So it's really frustrating as a fan to think you have a at least good, if not great, like baseball ops department who's doing their job well, only to be kind of, chopped down at the knees by ownership who continues to pull the rug out from under this baseball ops department who just wants to do their job. Give these guys a number and let them go. So it was frustrating. It still is. It still really is. Like, I hate the reason why we have to make the Robbie Ray trade. I hate the reason why Luke Raley is so like valuable to Seattle, but that's just the reality of what Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander are trying to deal with. And so I'm trying to, as a fan, kind of maneuver my thought process to accept the reality that Mariners ownership is bad, but Mariners baseball ops, the people who actually run the baseball side of things, appear to be really good at their job. And so, you just look at what's happened in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They've acquired Luke Raley, Mitch Haniger, Anthony Desclafani, and Mitch Garver for Jose Caballero and $12 million. Like, that's a pretty good haul. So it's been frustrating. There's no doubt about it. But I think we're finally starting to turn a corner. And I think you look at what the Mariners have accomplished this offseason. You look at what they still have room to do. It's really hard for me to not applaud the efforts of the front office in spite of the troublesome ownership group that time and time again has proven that they are only interested in winning if it fits in their budget.
Yeah, this is what makes this offseason so frustrating. The last couple of off seasons really so frustrating in retrospect is that I really do think that this front office and this baseball ops group in general is very good at what they do. They're not infallible. I'm not saying that they're elite and that they're not without mistakes, right? But I think that they're very good at what they do, and ownership basically restricting them, not giving them the resources that they deserve to really polish this thing off is just really disappointing. Just the way that this organization wants to operate, and some of the messaging that has come out over the last couple of months, and especially the press conference with Jerry and all that. I mean, it's an F of an off season just from a vibes standpoint, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse when Geno gets traded and Kelnick gets traded, and you understand what the purpose of those trades ultimately is and what the position the front office has been put in because of ownership and ownership's excuses for not wanting to invest more money into this ball club. And so that's just like, that's not going to be erased. No matter what the front office does, is going to erase that ultimately. Because like, even if the front office knocks the rest of this offseason out of the park, there's still what the driving force of why they've had to make some of these decisions, right? That's always going to be there. So that's just unavoidable. But in terms of what the front office has done now after clearing the necessary payroll and kind of reassessing what they need and how they need to go about that, I really like what they've done. I know that there's a lot of injury concerns with the players that they brought in, but you can see the vision. At least I can. I can see the vision of what they're trying to build right now. And I said even at the start of the off season, back when we didn't have the context of the financial issues and all that, at least to this degree, right? I think we always knew that there were some financial issues at play here, but before that, even when the possibility of Otani was popular and all that stuff, I said that they didn't I didn't feel like they necessarily needed to add another core player, right? Would totally take that. I would do backflips if they got Otani or Bellinger or whoever. But
Right.
if they just beefed up the supporting cast behind it, specifically in their lineup behind Julio and JP and Cal, I think they would be more than fine. They would be more than capable of competing for the division and anything else in the American League right now. So I think they've started to do that. I think the Mitch Garver signing is great for that. I think, getting Mitch Haniger back. I view Mitch Haniger in basically a very similar light to how we viewed, the possibility of adding someone like Adam Duvall or Tommy Pham or whatever. So that accomplishes essentially that. And then Luke Rayleigh, I think, especially just getting him for just Jose Caballero,
Right.
salute to Cabby and everything that he was able to do for them this season. He was a lot of fun to watch, but getting a potentially everyday outfielder for Jose Caballero, who I don't think there was a I don't think it was 100% that he was making the roster coming out of spring
Right.
training.
Definitely
Like
not
I
starting.
think that's a great deal for them. So I'm just really intrigued to see how they finish this thing off, right? They're obviously not going to make the big splash. I know there's like little rumors and stuff out there about Blake Snell, and people are still hoping for all that. I don't expect that. I do believe them when they say that they're looking for probably an an infielder and maybe a relief arm. And we'll see what significance those players are and what kind of money or resources that's going to take. But I feel like they're in a very similar spot right now in their off season to where they were last off season when they signed AJ Pollock, right? It was like, all right, they just need one more bat. They just need to do this one thing, and then I feel pretty good about it. And right now, I feel pretty similar that they just need to do one, maybe two more things, and I feel pretty good about where they are. But we'll see what that is, right? Because last year they followed up the Pollock signing with a lot of silence, and then here's Tommy La Stella,
Right.
and that was it. So
And
we'll see. It could be that again.
yeah, and it definitely has been a tale of two halves with the teardown and then the rebuild, basically, as far as payroll is concerned and freeing up that space. Um, I'm kind of surprised looking at that Robbie Ray trade that the Giants were willing to take on his full contract after an injury like that.
Yeah.
And they were able to free up that money for the future seasons to be able to potentially add. Um, I guess did you and then the fact, I guess here's a follow-up question to that trade. How big of a win was it to not just free up those future dollars with Robbie Ray's contract, but to also not have to trade one of your young, controllable, high ceiling starters that you can now use for this next year?
Yeah, well, one on the starting pitching front. I mean, the more I thought about it, because at the start of the offseason, I was like everyone else, where it's like, okay, well, if you're not going to have a ton of money to spend on offense, and in general, like generally speaking, the offensive market was bad. It is bad in free agency this year. But if you're going to add the bat that you need, use some of your starting pitching excess. But now that we have the context of these financial issues a bit more, and kind of looking down the road, and we've had Ryan Divish kind of send people in a frenzy about like they might have to trade Logan Gilbert in a year or two, or they might have to trade George Kirby in a few years. Bryce Miller and Brian Wu might be very, very important to this franchise down the road. So, having two club controlled, cheap starting pitchers who might be, middle of the rotation caliber as soon as this year, like that's incredibly important to this franchise. So, I understand now more so than ever why they would feel that it's so necessary to keep those guys. I think they're very, very crucial to not just this year's team, but future Mariners teams from that perspective. Um, what was the second part of your question, or what was the crux of your question?
Yeah, it was
So,
just kind of like how big of a win was it to now not have to trade one of those young guys because you were able
right,
to convince the Giants to take on Robbie Ray, who just came off that huge injury
right,
to
yeah. So why would the Giants want to take on that money as well? I think it's a really interesting challenge trade, right? I think the Giants are thinking that they're going to get Robbie Ray back and like he's going to be a middle of the rotation starter. And I think there's good reason to think that they're going to get that. I think there's a very easy path here for the Giants to end up getting the best player out of this deal. But I think it makes sense for both teams, right? And especially the Mariners, and we'll see how much of a win it is taking that money off of the books specifically for 2026, because that can allow them to be pretty creative with what they add either this winter or next winter in terms of backloading some deals, right? Maybe they do get Jorge Soler, which obviously is kind of an awkward fit now on the roster with Haneker and Garver in the mix. But if they were to sign him, they could turn him into like a $10 to $12 million player in 2024 and backload the contract and use some of that money that they freed up now with Ray in 2026, because all of a sudden you have $25 million that you were pretty much expecting to have to pay out just gone. That doesn't exist anymore. So we say this all the time whenever the Mariners free up money. It's like we're never really going to know if they're actually using that, if they're actually going to use that money or not. Like we'll never really have full context of that. But I would like to see them kind of follow that up with a creative way to add some payroll here.
What are the odds we see the Mariners front office follow the Dodgers and get some deferrals going?
We'll see. We'll see how many players are actually interested in that in that with Mariners, and we'll see if the Mariners are actually interested in committing a single cent in the 2030s.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already committing to Julio in the 2030s if his option gets picked up. But
that's true. That's good.
Yeah, point. I would say it's highly unlikely. I think we could see some backloaded deals, and I think it really depends on the player, because there are some players who they're just not going to be interested in that. They're also not going to be interested in that from Seattle. If they're going to sign with Seattle, they're going to want as much money as they can get up front right now. It's unfortunately just the geography and the I guess reputation of the Mariners that this is not a great place to come and hit, in particular if you're a hitter. Like obviously this refers to the Cody Bellinger types, like not a great place to hit. So I don't want to go there and think I'm going to get another contract after this because my numbers are probably going to go down. The deferral stuff might come into play with an arm, particularly one who maybe has a desire to play in the Pacific Northwest. I think you could see it if, Blake from Shoreline, as we call him, if he really is desperate to come and pitch for Seattle, then maybe you can make it work that way. But even then, I don't think that's really a fit that Seattle wants to go down. But I don't think you're going to see deferrals, but I think you will see backload of money. And they did it a little bit with the Garver contract. So they're certainly willing to do it. I think you're going to see options. I think you could see multi-year options. The Mariners have proven they'll get creative to get guys. They gave Robbie Ray the
opt-outs,
multi-year option, the opt-out, right? They gave Yusei Kikuchi this, they had a team option and a player option. And so they will get creative with opt-outs and backloading and stuff like that. I just don't think we're going to see deferrals. I think at least not significantly, but I mean, I think the Dodgers are kind of the only team right now doing that. And to think the Mariners would do something the Dodgers would do.
Well, and again, there's probably a reason that the only team doing it right now is the Dodgers, right? Because they're the Dodgers. A lot of players want to play for the Dodgers, so I don't know if we can say the same about the Mariners, but you never know. Like maybe Blake Snell would do that, but also with Snell, I just don't know how much interest the Mariners have in that right now. Because again, that's committing significant dollars long term to another pitcher when it seems like right now they're very much valuing how little they're having to pay one of the best pitching staffs in all of baseball right now. So,
and what do you figure if they did get Blake Snell? Then are they forced to trade one of those younger guys? Because are you going to send Brian Wu back to AAA or AA? I don't think so.
I don't think it's the worst idea in the world, because like you can manage his innings a little bit better that way and just kind of ease him into the swing of it. Because like here's the thing too, right? Is like he blew past his career high in innings last year.
Right.
Is that going to have an impact on him going into this year? Does he need to be kind of eased in where he only goes maybe 1 to 2 innings an outing for the first couple of starts of the year, etc.? Like you don't really want to do that at the major league level, but you can do that down in AA, because who cares what the Travelers do? Who cares if the Travelers win or lose, right? So there's obviously that. So I don't think that's like necessarily out of the question. But I do think like if you are signing Blake Snell, it does make you feel more like you probably should take advantage of the value that you have in that rotation to try and add more offense. But yeah,
one thing it might do, I don't know if it makes you trade Brian Wu, but it probably makes you more likely to trade Logan Gilbert in the next year or two.
That's true,
because obviously Gilbert's getting to the point where he's making some money. It's only $5 million. Next year it'll be like 10 or 11, like totally worth it. But your ARP3, ARP4, he's going to be making 15 to 20 million. And then how likely is he to sign an extension? Well, if you have, Blake Snell on a 6-year contract or whatever, you might be more willing to do that because Wu and Miller are cheap. So we don't know if payroll restraints are going to move forward, how they're going to look moving forward until we have some solution on the RSN. And even then, do you trust John Stanton if he tells you that the payroll is going to go up significantly in 2-3 years? I sure as heck wouldn't. So I think if you sign Snell, you're definitely more open to trading a pitcher. I just wonder maybe they might prefer in that scenario to trade Logan Gilbert, which I'm not a huge fan of. But
also, if you're trying to maximize your return on one of your pitchers, that's probably the guy to do it with. So
yeah.
And also, go for it.
I don't know what team could even give you a package worthy of trading Logan Gilbert, though. That's the other thing too. Find the team that has. Find the pitcher who's been as good as Logan Gilbert, who got traded with 4 years of club control left, and then tell me what that package looks like today, and then tell me which team has the ammo to trade for Logan Gilbert without completely gutting the rest of their team. It's not an easy fit.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever get on the whole trade Luis Castillo train or digest that a little bit?
No,
not an option.
The thing
it's an option.
The thing to keep in mind, though, all right, so same thing with Robbie Ray. I didn't know about this with Ray beforehand, and now I just recently found out about this with Castillo. So with Ray, one of the reasons that they were able to trade him to San Francisco is because at the start of the new year, his no trade clause converted into a $1 million trade assignment. Same thing happens to Luis Castillo after 2025. So I think that's maybe when we start talking more seriously about them trading Castillo is when that no trade clause converts into that trade assignment. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we've seen them in the drafts, build up this wave of big, pitching and Gilbert and Kirby and these guys coming through the system, Brian Wu, Bryce Miller. Now we're starting to see them shift the focus of the minor leagues really into that middle infield, bat heavy depth there. So which guys coming up are you guys looking after that might be able to impact the roster maybe this next year, if any, from the minor leagues?
Yeah, this year is going to be a little bit tough for that because I think most of the impact guys, their ETA is sometime next year. Now, you could see Cole Young in late August or September. He's certainly on that path, and he is excelling. Probably start year one. He's beating the majors by the end of it. So, the biggest prospect I could conceivably see getting a cup of coffee this year. But in terms of where's your Bryce Miller, where's your Brian Wu for this year? I don't think you have that guy. I think you're looking at Ryan Bliss, who is a fun prospect. I like Ryan Bliss, but there's questions there. I think you're looking at Zach DeLoach, who for me is a 4th, 5th outfielder. That's all he's ever been. That's all he's probably ever going to be. But he might be able to help. And then depending on what the Mariners decide to do with Ty France, Tyler Locklear is probably the highest upside bat that I would say has a realistic shot of getting significant plate appearances this year for Seattle. So I think it's Locklear, Bliss, and then DeLoach a little bit. But, we also shouldn't forget Cade Marlowe, who came up and had an impact last year. But obviously we've seen him. So and we also shouldn't, overlook the guys who come out of nowhere, like Jose Caballero last year was on his list, and he came up and he was a 2-win player for you, and he kind of saved your second base situation for 2 months. So there's always guys who come off the board and some guys you don't expect, and usually for the Mariners it's bullpen arms. But when I look at, just guys who haven't made their major league debut yet, who could come up this year and who could, conceivably play a big role on this team, there's not a lot. So I would say it's Ryan Bliss and Tyler Locklear are your two best bets at that. But even then, I don't feel great about either of those guys coming up and basically giving you what Bryce Miller and Brian Wu did last year, and just in terms of value.
No,
right.
I think Bliss, I can definitely see him giving you a fairly similar season to what Jose Caballero gave you this past year, which that would help. That would certainly help quite a bit. Especially on the back end of your roster. If Ryan Bliss is your 26th man essentially, and he's doing that, you're in a pretty solid spot. The other guy I would mention too that I don't think you mentioned, Colby, is Prolander Baroa. Now we saw him like a little bit, like a very small amount this season, but if you're looking for, and I mean the Mariners are apparently looking for this guy according to Ken Rosenthal, like they're looking for more help on the back end of their bullpen. They're looking for kind of a third guy to pair with Munoz and Brash, like they had with Paul Sewald. Baroa has the highest upside of anyone in the Mariners farm system, in my mind, just or in the Mariners organization in general, to be that guy, to be that third high leverage, legit high leverage arm in the back of the bullpen immediately. He has the stuff for it. The problem with him really has just been throwing strikes, but he started throwing more strikes towards the end of the season. And look, I know it's one game, but that one game we saw towards the end of the year with him was pretty electric stuff. So, and we kind of caught a similar glimpse of that a couple of years ago with Andres Munoz in the season finale against the Angels. The what was that? That was the Kyle Seager game, right? Yeah, that was the Kyle Seager game, and Munoz looked awesome in that. And then he just took off running the next year. So
also throw Carlos Vargas into the mix if you're
Carlos
looking for
Vargas, yeah,
potential
Also,
high upside.
Jackson Kowar looks filthy. I watched some of his film, and he's got like that Devin Williams type changeup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they really like him, and I know that people thought of him as a throw-in, and Kowar was the guy that I really was interested in coming out of Florida. I think that was the year the Mariners drafted Gilbert, so they made the right call there, no doubt about it. But he came up as a kind of a sinker slider guy, and he just kind of didn't really work, and then it looks like he may have started to find a pitch that he could actually work with. Kowar will be interesting because there's a non-zero chance he starts I think he's got an option left. I could be wrong. But there's a non-zero chance he starts the year in Tacoma and he gets starter innings because the Mariners still do need some, decent starting pitching depth. And Kowar obviously has, the kind of pedigree that the Mariners tend to target in their like waiver claims and the small deals. So yeah, Kowar is a really fun guy. That's one of the guys I'm going to watch pretty closely in spring training. I'm intrigued by Kowar. I really am.
Yeah, even the biggest like Jerry DiPoto detractors have to admit that this regime has been very good at identifying arms specifically for the bullpen. So the thing we always say on our podcast is like, if they make a waiver claim like they did today, right, on an arm, pay attention. Like, don't rule anything out with any of these guys that they bring in. The odds are like they're probably roster fodder. They're 40-man fodder at the end of the day. But sometimes they really hit, and when they hit on these guys, they tend to hit pretty big on them. So, Kowar. If they're talking about Kowar a lot, that makes me pretty excited about what they may have identified there, because that's really their thing, right? They identify a certain pitch or a certain tweak that they think they can make to elevate that guy's game, and they've done that a lot. Guys like Paul Sewald can attest to that.
And last offseason, the Mariners added Justin Topa, Spire, Saucedo, Gott, all these guys that you have no clue about. And then Topa ends up being arguably your best reliever all year consistently. And then it's funny because I had Pete Woodworth on and I just had Topa on and asked them, this Mariners pitching lab that everyone is talking about, what's so special about what the Mariners do compared to what other teams do and with their pitching? And ultimately, it comes down to the dominate the zone thing. It's the fundamentals of baseball. The more strikes that you throw, the better chance you have at getting guys out. And they, instead of saying, hey, don't do this, they show them their strengths and say, just do this more. And so it's kind of funny how when you simplify things, that ends up being potentially the best thing for them. So,
yeah, I think a lot of baseball in general is just, here's what they don't do, and this is why they can never be good, or this is why they can't, this is why they have a floor that's really low and all that stuff. This is what they can't do. And that's what a scout does, right? It's his job, because if the scout picks wrong, if he's all in on a guy and he turns out to be trash, it's getting fired, right? There's dozens of who can replace him. So they always kind of lean into the negative. And it's amazing what happens when you just turn that on your head and you say, okay, well, if he doesn't do this well, what does he do well? Okay, well, we'll just have him do that more.
Yeah.
And it works. It's amazing how something that simple, that's something that like, a fourth grader would be able to be like, oh, he doesn't do that. He does that good, but he doesn't do that good. Okay, we'll just have him do the thing he does good. Right. And it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. And yet somehow it's overlooked by a lot of teams. and a lot of player development staffs.
Yeah, I think that's something that we can like at least partly attribute to guys that like Andy McKay, who have kind of dictated the philosophy of this Mariners regime. That put your players, put your guys in the best positions to succeed, right? So again, if it's like Jackson Kowar should be throwing his changeup more, do that instead of telling him to stop throwing X, Y, and Z in
Right.
this situation, right?
Right. We're going to change your entire windup because
Yeah,
we think we can get an extra mile out of your fastball. And so, well, you don't need the extra mile out of the fastball. You just need to do this instead because this is what you're already doing. This is what works for you. This is what doesn't. Do the stuff that works for you.
Yeah.
It's funny how often like revolutionary, not that this is revolutionary, but what I mean, like these big ideas that change baseball and all that stuff, they're really simple. They're really basic. And it's like, why didn't more teams just do that?
Yeah.
And it's just, that's the way the sports work most of the time.
yeah.
Paul Sewell, just throw your fastball at the top of the zone,
Mhm.
those types of things.
Yeah.
And then, really them banking on or detecting and going after velocity, because you can't teach velocity, but you can teach how to command or to throw an speed pitch like Carlos Vargas being added. He's up to 101. Kowar is up there too. But so kind of moving into next year, I guess, looking at third base, Luis Arias, what do you guys see with him and the potential at third base?
Colby loves Luis Urias. Colby thinks that Luis Urias is winning the MVP next year. Colby, tell us why.
Okay. No, I think he can be better than Gino, and I know that Gino is a super important player to the Mariners because he played here for 2 years. Mariner fans love guys who say they love Seattle, so that's all it takes. But no, and also I love Gino. He's awesome. Good vibes only, but he wasn't very good last year offensively. He really wasn't, and I think he was like a 104 WRC plus, but even that is misleading because he was wildly inconsistent. The power went way down, the bat speed went way down. Like there are some red flags with Suarez, and I think you saw how little the Mariners got for him. That wasn't because they took less; it's because that's what the rest of the league thinks of where Suarez is headed.
Well, and it's also not like the Diamondbacks were the only team interested either, right?
Mm-hmm. So when I look at Urias, I look at a guy who's 25, 26 years old, a guy who prior to this last year had, 2 110, 112 WRC plus seasons, a guy who can play a good third base, a guy who's a totally passable shortstop. He can play second base. And I just look at what he did the previous 2 years and I say, okay, well, what prevented him from doing that in 2023? Is there an obvious reason? Yes, he got hurt. He had a really bad hamstring pull. So I'm not of the opinion that it's likely that a 25-year-old who's been an above average player for 2 years all of a sudden forgot how to play baseball, like forgot how to hit. I don't think that that's what happens. So
Yeah.
to me, I look at that and I say, why did he struggle so much last year? What's the most simple and most obvious, most likely answer to that question? He got hurt. He played 55 games. By the time he got back, he was kind of a part-time player as well. He got hurt. He's a good player, not a great player, who got hurt, so he had a bad season.
Right.
I'm pretty bullish on that guy bouncing back, and Urias in particular, he's a line drive guy, lots of doubles. He's probably not going to hit 25, 30 home runs, which is typically what you want out of your third baseman, but I think he's got a real good shot to be at least as good as Gino defensively. Like, he's a good defender at multiple spots. And for the last 2 years, he's been a good, solid hitter. Why can't he do that in 2024 as a 26-year-old, 27-year-old?
Yeah.
Just makes all the sense in the world to me that he's going to bounce back and he's going to be fine. I joke, I say, oh, he's going to be an all-star and all that stuff. Better defensive third base, hit 20 home runs, 250, get on base a decent amount. Yeah, of course he can. Why? Because he's already done it. Right. So I'm pretty bullish, I guess, on Urias by even suggesting that he's at least an everyday quality player at the position. So I guess I'm the high guy on Urias just for that.
Yeah, real quick on like Gino, right? There's some real concerns about his bat speed, and it seems like, especially like at his age now, you kind of wonder if he's just the cliff is there, right? He's found the cliff, and I think a lot of teams, like Colby just talked about, agreed with that, because it wasn't just the Diamondbacks in on him. It was also the Blue Jays. It was the Rays. Like I don't know for sure, but I would think that they had some extensive talks with other teams, and there were some other offers maybe out there. And when you look at what they got, that's probably the best that they could have gotten. And, like I talked about earlier, like obviously, it seems very obvious that the driving force of that trade is the money, or at least a good part of it. But I do think there was actually a baseball reason for moving on from Gino as well, and going to a much younger player in Urias. And again, like it's injuries, right? You look at his past year at 2023. He suffers an injury towards the end of spring training. Then he suffers another injury later on in the year. He gets traded mid-season to Boston, becomes essentially a part-time player. It's a lot of stop and start, stop and start, stop and start. I think there are a lot of, like, I'm not trying to just make excuses, but I do think that there are some legitimate reasons that he just struggled all of a sudden after being an everyday player for the past 2 years in Milwaukee. It's just like that doesn't typically happen, especially with, because like we're not talking about a 32-year-old here. We're not talking about Tommy La Stella and his double Achilles injuries and all this stuff at 30 plus years old, right? We're talking about, again, a mid 20s player who already has 2 quality seasons under his belt and had a really unfortunate season this past year, with a lot of different things that kind of factored in. So I feel pretty good about Urias, at least being like a 1.5, 2-win player this year, and I think that there's the potential for more, especially new situation, all that. So I don't think that the Mariners are going to be that bad at third base, as bad as I think a lot of fans are kind of expecting them to be, because they look at really, a lot of people only look at what Gino did this past year or the past couple of years in Seattle, and they look at what Urias did this past year, and they kind of ignore the context of why that all happened, and they go, "Well, that's a significant downgrade," and it might be. At the end of the day, it very well might be, and maybe Urias has fallen off a cliff. But I do think that there are legitimate reasons to think that that's not the case, that he will be able to bounce back and that they're going to get quality production out of him. And even the projection models feel pretty similarly about that too. I think they're projecting Urias to be a more valuable hitter in 2024 than Gino. So, or just about, close to that. So, yeah, but also if you're able to make it where you're not so reliant upon Urias producing and Rojas producing, do it. If you have that chance to do that, then do it. And apparently that's kind of what they're trying to do right now, according to that Rosenthal report. So we'll see.
What do you guys think about trading for Polanco? And then also after we get off this, talking about Ty France at first base, what they might potentially do there.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing that I'm getting hung up on right now with that Rosenthal report is what significance of infielder are they ultimately looking at, right? Because if they're looking at an everyday guy, considering what their financial limitations are, the fact that they're probably not going to trade one of the pitchers, and as Hollander said last night on the Hot Stove Report, like 90% of the teams in the league don't want to trade for lower level prospects. So factoring that all in, there's like 2 guys, maybe 3, who fit the description of what they would be looking for and what they could afford essentially as an everyday second baseman or third baseman. Because they're not going to blow their budget on Matt Chapman. Like, let's just get that out of the way. That's not going to happen, right? And I think there are a lot of reasons, just pure baseball reasons, even if they had more money than God, like to not sign Matt Chapman. So, especially for what he's apparently been asking for. So Polanco is obviously one of those guys. Willie Adames is another guy that I would consider to be in that tier. And then we get into like the maybes, right? Brandon Lau, maybe. Gleyber Torres, maybe. Jeff McNeil, can he throw? Who knows? Right now after his elbow injury. So with Polanco, I mean, the Twins have outright said, like, we want to dump payroll, right? Because they're one of those Bally sports teams. They're trying to dump payroll despite coming off of a division title and winning a playoff series, all that. So they don't have a ton of leverage, right? Because Polanco is one of like 2 guys there that makes the most sense in terms of dumping payroll. But also, like, you're not going to be the only bidder for Polanco. So it just really comes down to cost, right? Because if like we get into a territory where they're asking for Cole Young or Cole Emerson, I think the Mariners are telling them, have a nice day, right? But
Right.
if it's like on the high end, if it's like Gabriel Gonzalez and like a mid-leverage reliever like Gabe Spire or someone like that, it hurts, but I probably do it because again, I'm getting an everyday player that can slot in at either second base or third base. He's not a particularly good defender, but I'm getting a guy that 2 years ago was like a 4-win player, and the last couple of years has been like a 115-ish WRC plus guy. That really helps my lineup right now. And I ultimately care about what makes my 2024 team better at the end of the day right now. So yeah. So I like the idea. It's just again, like with everything, it's cost dependent.
Yep. I like Polanco. Good player. I think he's still got something left in the tank. There's also that option, so it may or may not be a rental depending on how he performs. But yeah, overall, I think he's probably the best of a bad group, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And it's not because he's bad; it's just because there's not a lot of options. So I'm into it. I'm not trading Wu. I'm not trading Miller. Obviously, I'm not trading Ford, Emerson. I'm probably not even trading like Ty Pete. Like I'm trading for this guy, and I'm taking on his salary. I'd love to get him for like a Jonathan Clase as the headliner type. But if it takes Gabriel Gonzalez, I can totally understand why they do that. So yeah, I like Polanco. I'm in on that idea, assuming the price is in the realm of reason. I'm pretty interested in that idea. I think he's just your best option, and he puts one of Urias or Rojas on the bench, and one of those guys is on the bench. Your starting lineup's probably pretty good.
Yeah.
Working off that, let's get into a question here. And if you're watching the stream, make sure to like and subscribe. And so first off here, M's get Gunnar Henderson. O's get Bryce Miller, Tyler Locklear, and one more top 10 prospect not named Young, Ford, or Emerson. He'll take your insults now.
So I don't know if AP here is familiar with our show that we do every Friday called Fan Fiction Friday, but we grade Mariners trades on the 20 to 80 scouting scale. 25. The Orioles aren't trading Gunnar Henderson. That's just
Right.
that's a non-starter at that point. Like the first sentence you said, the first sentence, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like maybe they are if you're trading them George Kirby.
Yeah.
But like no,
I'm not trading George Kirby.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is. So yeah, Miller, Locklear, and then one more top 10 prospect, not named your three really good prospects. You're out. Like you're already out. So,
Yeah.
If we assume that the Orioles were interested in trading Gunnar Henderson, Miller would certainly have to be a part of it. But it's probably Miller and Wu, and like Ford. Like we're talking about the rookie of the year who was just a 4-win guy and can play shortstop, and like
He can
he's
play
just
shortstop, he can play third, both at a
right,
high
absolute
level.
stud, power, like hit tool. Like you're talking about a 5-tool guy.
It's like trading for Julio after his rookie year.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
On the same level.
Yeah, I mean more or less.
Yeah.
So what would you take for Julio? That's probably what the Orioles would ask in return, and that's just it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Getting to a few more here. Raul said, I literally watch y'all listen to you every day. That's shouting out you guys.
Appreciate it.
Texas Rangers fan club clubhouse. I've seen some of his stuff. As a Rangers fan, he hated seeing Garver go up to Seattle. So he said that you'll love his bat, and he's a super good dude too. I've heard he's a great clubhouse guy.
Yep.
Yeah. He's
terrible
spoken
nickname.
very Garf sauce. You're not a
Terrible
Garf sauce.
No, I'm not. That's awful. But I tell you what, if you put up a 135 WRC plus or whatever, I'll call you whatever you want.
Yeah, I'll call you whatever.
Whatever you want.
Whatever. But yeah,
now it's more Mitches, more.
That's right.
Yeah, more Mitches, no problems.
Yeah,
that's
right.
right.
Mitches be crazy.
Yeah. What do you guys think of Service as the skipper going into this upcoming season?
Fine. I know that there's a lot.
Uh-oh, Ty, we lost you.
Looks like your mic cut out there.
I'll take it from here. So
My
my yeah, uh, yeah, my
Oh, you're lagging a bit there. Now his went out.
we good?
Okay, Ty, your mic is back out now. Oh, there you go. I think you might be back.
Are we back? Are we back? Are we good?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right.
And now he's out.
It went out again.
You might want to leave and come back. Try that. But anyways, I don't know if you still have me, but
Yeah, you're good.
okay. Yeah, my relationship with Scott as the manager of this ball club is pretty steady, but also at the same time, like occasionally I'll look for a rebound, like because like there are some things Scott does, like in an in-game management level, that drive me nuts. I don't think he's a great improviser. I think he's really good at coming up with a plan, and I think when the plan, it's a good plan, and when things fall in line with that plan, he executes it well. He stays the course, and he does all that really well. I think when something doesn't go right, for example, like when his starting pitcher struggles, right, and he is so dead set on, well, I needed him to go 6 tonight. Like I need to get at least 5 out of him. And in the meantime, your 4-0 deficit in the third is 6-0 because he gave up a double and now the game's over. I think he struggles with, kind of when he has to play, off script a little bit. That being said,
why we don't live shows. This is exactly
that makes sense.
That's right. But that being said, Scott as a culture builder, Scott as a leader, like the things that we don't see on TV on a night-to-night basis, Scott seems to knock that out of the park. And he's had to deal with some really difficult clubhouses because, who have not been popular whatsoever. And obviously he has to deal with, he kind of has to be the player's voice with ownership. And like he has to deal with all that stuff too. So I think Scott does a great job with the culture. I think for the most part, he makes really good game plans and he executes them well. But I think the one area where he struggles a little bit is that, if the plan, goes off course, like he really struggles to kind of adapt to that. But overall, how do I feel about him going into the season? Totally fine. He's not, to me, all I want from my manager is to not be an issue. Like, don't be a part of the problem. I don't think Scott is. I think he does a good job overall. And I think the stuff he does with the culture and all that stuff is really important to this clubhouse because there have been moments where this thing could have gotten fragmented really badly. And Scott's managed to kind of hold it together as far as we know, as far as we're privy to. So I feel totally fine with Scott as the manager going forward. I'm not, if I could get Bob Melvin or Kevin Cash, fine. I'm like, sorry, Scott, but I feel totally fine. I think he's a top 10-ish manager, and I think he's perfect for what Seattle really needs right now.
Yeah, I overall feel fine about service. It's also because it's so hard to quantify a manager and like the manager's impact, especially because we're not in the clubhouse. We don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes. And yeah, he's frustrating. In game, there are some very frustrating things that he does in game, but show me a manager in all of baseball whose fan base doesn't complain about him over the course of a season. Like everyone complains about their manager. Everyone complains about their coach, their GM, etc. in every single sport there is, right? So I try not to get too reactionary with the stuff with Scott because again, there's so much context that we will never have. But from the outside looking in, it does seem like he is a good leader for that clubhouse, that he is capable of keeping them together as much as he possibly can. Because like Colby said, there have been some very difficult times in that clubhouse very recently. So, I don't think that he handled the Cal Raleigh thing towards the end of the season particularly well. But overall, I don't have too many gripes with how Scott has handled things.
And as you mentioned, fans, you got to find a scapegoat at some point. If something's going wrong, you got to find something to blame to take your energy out.
Right.
Christian says, put Soler at first. How hard could it be?
It's incredibly hard.
Let me show you a scene from Moneyball.
The same thing about putting him in the outfield. It's like that guy's a liability out there.
Yeah. It's such an awkward fit, but also I love Jorge Soler, so I'm down.
He's got the power that can stand in any stadium.
Yeah. Like the lineup, great. the defensive alignment.
You just got to score some more runs to make up for it.
Did you not watch Teoscar Hernandez in the field last year? Like, it's probably worse than that. I mean, maybe not. It'd be hard to be. But...
I mean, hey, Teo in April and May though was kind of
he surprised us all. Sure. I mean, but like the Phillies, right? Screw defense, hit dingers. That's the Phillies motto, right? We're just gonna hit dingers and we're gonna strike guys out, and that's screw outfield defense. Who cares?
Yeah, so. I feel like that applies a little bit differently to T-Mobile Park though. So
you mean when you're not playing in a Little League park, outfield defense matters some?
Yeah. Hey, Julio will just catch everything.
He's gonna have to.
There you go. So Joseph says Ty is an ex-Navy sailor who lived up there in 2011 USS Nimitz. I like you say, hey, what's up, sailor, to start the show. It brings me good memories.
Ahoy, sailors.
I love that little video that someone put together of, I think it's Popeye on the ship with Scott Service in the background and all these guys popping up. I'm sure you've seen that, right? Like
I think I've seen that on Twitter. Yeah. We have some very creative people in the Mariners community.
Yeah, it's a good time on Mariners Twitter.
Yeah.
What are your guys' thoughts on signing someone like Juan Yepez or Brian Anderson?
Brian Anderson.
Tim Anderson off of that too.
Tim Anderson too. Yeah. So Brian Anderson is someone that they've shown interest in the past. And what do we know about Jerry DiPoto and Justin Hollander? They love circling back on guys. They just did that with Anthony DeSclafani. So I could definitely see them do.
Apparently also with Luke Raley.
Luke Raley,
right.
apparently. Yeah. So so I could definitely see them going after Anderson, probably in terms of like a minor league deal. I think he's a good candidate to get a minor league deal this year. I don't think he's going to get a major league deal from anyone unless it's like the Rockies or someone like that. Oakland, maybe. But I think there's a pretty good shot that you could get him on a minor league deal. And Juan Yepez, I haven't really thought about at all. I don't really have.
I think he's signed in Korea or Japan. I think he's going overseas, actually. Yeah. I could be wrong, but I thought I saw a report.
I don't really have any thoughts on. Yeah, I don't really have any thoughts on him. Tim Anderson, though, I mean, coming off of just a disaster of a year, just terrible, was garbage this year. But we have seen good Tim Anderson. Good Tim Anderson is fun. He is a very fun baseball player. But if that's like your last addition,
it's been a hot minute. You've seen good Tim Anderson.
Yeah. So I'm not super on board with that. But good Tim Anderson is really fun. If they were able to get that somehow, yeah.
I could get hyped for Tim Anderson. Like if you just, I'd be like,
I could cope my way into it.
Yeah, I could totally like I liked him. It's some stuff now. I could. Brian Anderson. I like that on a minor league deal. We did a show a few weeks ago where we went over some minor league signing guys, and Anderson was definitely way up there.
Yeah.
I mean, Ty, I think it's universal. I don't think Ty and I invented it, but we do say this often. There is no such thing as a bad minor league signing unless there's off the field issues to consider. But there's no such thing as a bad 1-year contract either, unless there's off the field issues to consider.
Right.
Yeah. Blake says, I don't care about the defense. I just care about the 500-foot nuke shots. Please sign Soler. That's
solid.
Accurate.
Yeah, solid philosophy on that. Yeah, agree.
And then question, do you guys watch 162 games every year? Or
Yeah. No, I mean, we
tell them about the time you left the game early in Toronto this year. Did you watch all that one?
On the train.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
On the train.
After Cal won.
Yeah. Listen, I had a bad 2 first games of that series. All right, it was my birthday. I was gonna go celebrate my birthday and not be sad about the
Marriage. Only get to watch 3 games live.
I know. But yes, to answer your question, yeah. Well, 162. I mean, like if something comes up, then maybe not. But I pretty much have to watch every game. I mean, it's our job, like literally to watch every game. So yeah.
Yeah, I would say I probably watch about, I don't know, close to 160 live. And then there are times where I have to go back and watch like the last couple innings because before this last September, like I had another job. It was a night job to kind of make ends meet. So I'd have to either go back and watch, or I'd be watching on my phone while I was supposed to be doing my job. So yeah, I watch. You know, I wouldn't say I see every single pitch because there are just sometimes I can't, but at some point I will watch every single game. Not always live, but always before we do our next show. So yeah, I see 162.
Awesome. Well, Ty and Colby, really appreciate your time. Everyone that's been on the stream, thank you for watching and tuning in. Make sure to go subscribe to Locked On Mariners if you probably are already. But it's going to be a fun year for the Mariners. And thank you again, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, Connor. Really appreciate the invite.
Yep, thanks.
You got it.